Well, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in on this video today. My name is Heath Queen. I'm the internship coordinator in Compass and Career Services at Wittenberg University, and I'm excited to talk to you just a little bit about some tips and best practices surrounding interviewing both in person and in virtual formats. So we're going to dive right into the content today, but this should be helpful to provide some info that you might not have thought about surrounding interviews before that can help you have a successful time providing and answering questions for an employer, graduate school program, or whatever it might be, so that you can secure the opportunity that you are seeking. The first thing I always just stress in any interview context is to do some research ahead of time. There's a lot of preparation that you will do, obviously, on thinking through some of the experiences that you want to use as examples, thinking through some of your answers to general types of interview questions. But a lot of times people don't do enough research on the actual organizations that they are interviewing with, whether that be a grad program or an employer. You should take some time to do some in depth research on the employer, know the products and services, know what's going on in the news about the employer. Have that information when you go in. One, it helps you form it helps you have informed questions to ask the employer. You should not be going into an interview and asking the employer things like, what types of products do you all make? Those are simple things that you can learn from just some simple searching on the website that you should do ahead of time. But you should always have questions formulated for the employer. Um, you can intersperse these throughout or at the end, depending on how the interview is going. But you should have some questions that are created based on the research that you've done on the company and the role. They should be informed by content that you already have been able to find. In addition, we like to recommend for any interview setting, whether that be in person or online, that you arrive 15 minutes early. This could mean you're walking through the door of the company 15 minutes early, or you are just sitting at home and sitting prepping for the interview in front of your camera, and you're got the meeting open and you got your tech stuff figured out 15 minutes early. It's helpful just because you don't want to be rushing into an interview. One, you don't want to be rushing into an interview because it can throw you off as you are, in a high pressure scenario. If you're rushing, it just makes it worse. Giving yourself a moment to breathe before you have to go in and get asked all sorts of questions that you have to field for 30 minutes. It's helpful just to be there so you can take a breath. It's also good just to build in some extra time for travel, for tech issues, whatever it might be, depending on the context of your interview. Uh, you may need gas because you forgot to get it the night before. You may run into traffic or an accident or something like that. And you want to make sure you're giving yourself enough time to get ready to go. And also just remember to be kind. So this is especially important for in-person interviews where you may have the opportunity to interact with people in other departments, or you may be interacting with the janitor in the lobby when you arrive, the receptionist at the front desk, the person at the lunch counter if they're taking you to lunch that day. All of those people should be viewed as potential interviewers. Some companies they have methods for people to report and to comment on candidates when they come into the office for people far more broad than just the recruiters that you might be meeting with. Not every company is going to have something like this, and generally most won't. But you also want to show the recruiters and the people that you are interviewing with that you have some care and concern and are trying to, present yourself in a professional way, even to those who may not have any say in the hiring for your role. Be nice. You also want to thank everyone. Thank them for their time at the end of the interview in person. Say it verbally. Thank you for your time. But you also want to make sure that you are sending a note if you can and have email addresses for them. Send a note within 24 hours of the interview, thanking them for their time and open yourself up for questions or further information about the role. It's best to send this through email just because you want it to get there quickly. I've had some people send thank you cards through the mail. The only challenge with that is job processes are happening so rapidly these days that they may have already made their decision by the time that letter gets in the mail. And it's just nice to have an immediate kind of thank you from them on their side. So do that. I also just want to stress, have something to take notes with. Take a piece of paper or a notepad, something professional. Obviously not loose leaf paper, something like that. Take a notebook or some type of device for you to take notes and to be engaged. One, taking notes helps you to pay attention to what's going on in the interview. It's easy to get distracted when you're in a new place and looking around and you got all sorts of new things around you. You're also trying to think of answers to questions. Simply taking notes, one, it can help you remember things after you leave, but it's also just a way to make sure you're paying attention to what's going on in that context at the moment. We're going to create another video later about professional dress and what that looks like. But for the purposes of this, I just want to make a couple comments. One, you want to make sure for interviews that basic grooming is taken care of. This means that regular hair, facial hair, nails, all of that stuff are nicely kept and ready to go. You also want to just make sure you're being, obviously everyone has a different perception of what professional dress means, and we'll cover that in another video. But general rule is you want to make sure you're wearing professional clothing, free from stains, scuffs, awkward fits, those types of things. If your shoes need polish, make sure they're ready to go. You just want to be mindful of how you are presenting yourself and what that might be communicating to the employer who you are meeting with. And a big thing also is animals. You don't want to take your four paws dog with you in the form of its hair. And I recognize that that is sometimes one of my biggest pet peeves, at least when it happens to me with our pup at home. But you get a lint roller or something, get the hair off your suit, get the hair off your blouse, whatever it might be. Just make sure you are taking care and being mindful of how that looks in a professional setting. So let's talk a little bit about what does an effective answer look like. There's lots of ways you can approach answering an interview question. Some are more effective than others. And I just want to talk to you a few minutes about some things to think about to help make your interviews both easier for you, I think, and also more impactful for the employer who hears it. And the first thing is concise answers. No one likes sitting in an interview with someone who goes on and on and on. If you are a person like me who loves to talk, be mindful that you should make sure you have a concise answer where you reframe the question or restate the question, give your example of how you've done that, and then wrap up shop. Don't, circle around and go off the trail and add two examples in when you only need one. One example for one question. Go in, restate the question, give the example, wrap up. You want to make sure that you are not just going on and on and on. One, because there's only a short time you have for the interview. So if you spend, most of the time answering long responses for a few questions, you may not actually get to all the questions they want to ask you. And that may hurt you later on in the process. You also just want to have a positive attitude. People leave their roles at companies and organizations for a variety of reasons. But you don't need to throw your current company under the bus, talk about how, getting this new job is going to change a bad situation. Like, don't do any of that in an interview. Sound positive about your past experience, sound positive about the company you're going to work for now. And, you can, if they ask you, why are you wanting to leave? You can, mention, some general thoughts about why you want to leave, but you don't need to go as far as just completely denigrating your current company if you're leaving a situation that's less than desirable. And then give examples. I've been in so many interviews over time where someone will say the answer to my question doesn't include an example. It's just simply affirming the positive of the position I'm asking. So for an example, I'll ask someone, can you tell me give me an example or tell me of a time when you demonstrated effective communication skills? And the person's answer is, communication skills are really important. I'm really strong on communication skills. I love communication skills. I think they're one of the top things you need in an employer or in a position. They just keep going on and on about how important communication skills are and how they're all about it, but they never do give an example. You want to try as hard as possible, not just to simply affirm what they're saying, but to provide a concrete example from your past experience of when you demonstrated those skill sets or abilities. When I think about effective answers in an interview setting, I like to use the STAR format. One, because it's easy to remember, it's an acronym, it's easy to just pull off the top of your head and try to form your answers in response to this model. If you can use this STAR format, your answers are most certainly going to be more impactful and meaningful for an employer. And it's just easier for you to remember at the same time. STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So when you're answering a question, you should always provide the situation. What was the context? Where was this happening? Was it at a role? Was it at a previous job? What was it with a group? What was the context? What task? Like, what was the assignment? What was the project? What were you working on? And then specifically, what action did you take? What was your role? What specific thing that you took led to a certain result? What was the outcome? If you can include all four of these things in your interview answers, they're going to be much more effective than much of what you might do otherwise. I also like talking about the four question types you're regularly going to face in an interview setting. Um, each one has a different strategy for how you'd want to prepare for it. But it's helpful to know that these types of questions are going to come, so that you have time to think through what possible answers might there be for you to utilize. The first one is general questions. These are going to be basic questions that can be fair game for any interview. You could get them in a graduate school interview, in a job interview, for any company in any field. Things like our favorite, what's your biggest weakness? Give us a time when you faced a challenge and how you solved it. Why do you want this job? Why should we hire you? Why do you want to be in this graduate program? And so on. So these are just questions. You're almost certainly going to face a couple of them that are just going to be helpful for you to think through some answers to ahead of time. And these are things you can think through ahead of time because you know they're going to come. They're the most anticipated questions you might face. Then there's some job specific questions. These are going to be questions related to the role, the qualifications, and your ability to do the work they're asking you to do. So they may ask something like, this position calls for blank skills. Can you describe your past experience with this or give an example? Or they may call out something on your resume and say, I see you've developed experience in Microsoft Excel, which is actually really important for the role that we're hiring for. Can you tell us how you used it? So that's another reason why it's important to think through what is actually on your resume and what are you going to be able to, how are you going to be able to talk about that experience when asked. And then the third are company specific. These are going to be questions to test your knowledge of the company, what they do, what their products are, that type of thing. So they may be asking you, like, tell us about what you know about the company. What are you most excited for about working here with us? You know, our core values are blank and blank. Can you tell us how you might exemplify them, or give us an example of when you've exemplified them in the past? Those are all things that you can expect to be asked. And then the fourth question I like to focus on a little bit because for those of you who are in quantitative fields or you're in fields that require a lot of logic, you may face challenge questions when it comes time to applying for a job. And these are questions they seem almost impossible to solve, but they don't necessarily look for a right answer. They're really testing your ability to solve a problem. And so an example of these might be, how many balloons fit into a Toyota Camry? That seems like a ridiculous question. Why would they want to know this? How do I even go about it? Another one might be, how many bricks would I need to build a 2-story home? Or how long will it take me to drive from Chicago from here? They're questions that seem impossible. And to be honest, you're not going to give them a correct answer because they don't even probably know a correct answer. But what you want to do with these questions and some strategies to give successful answers are as follows. You want to ask them follow-up questions. You know, how big is this a 2-door or 4-door Toyota Camry? Are the balloons that are fitting in it blown up, or are they deflated? Are these like the balloon animal balloons, the long balloons? Are they the normal round balloons? What type of balloons are we talking about? You also want to show a thought process. Try to reason out loud so that you can show them how you're moving from assumptions to a guess. Don't worry about the correct number. Don't worry about the correct answer. That's not the point. They're trying to test your ability to reason through a difficult or impossible challenge and how you might approach it. And then actually give an answer. Give an answer. It's not going to be the right answer, but you're giving an answer based on assumptions and based on educated guesses that you're making because you gathered the information along the way. So the answers to the effective way to answer these questions is, again, not the right answer, but showing how you might approach solving a problem like that should you be faced with a challenge. Again, probably more for quantitative folks or people who are in computer science or heading into a research field, but you may experience this at the same time. Let's talk about virtual interviews and what makes them different. Virtual interviews used to be the first round pick. It's used to be the first round that you would interview with before getting asked into the organization and the company. Today, that is almost changed completely. And you may actually never meet someone in person until your first day on the job. You may be interviewing virtually throughout the entire process. COVID has changed that, and people have realized, we don't really necessarily need them to be here for that to work. So how are virtual interviews different? And I want to talk about this through the framework of three different things: the technology, the space, and the interview itself. So when it comes to the technology, you should always know the platform in which you are going to be using. WebEx, Skype for Business, Skype, Zoom, Google Meet, Microsoft Teams. There's so many of them that are out there. You should know the platform, primarily because you want to be able to have some information on how to troubleshoot issues with that platform. You want to make sure you have it downloaded on your system, and you want to test it. You want to test the platform and make sure it's working well with your camera and your microphone, and that it's easy to pull up, and that if there are issues or things you need to troubleshoot, that you know how to do it on the day of. And this also follows in with knowing your system. Making sure that the webcam, the microphone, all of those things are ready to go and that you can troubleshoot them. Internet is a difficult thing, as everyone has probably realized, doing classes from the dorms, if you're still doing those. Internet draws a lot of bandwidth when you're doing virtual meetings because internet has a download and an upload speed, and during virtual meetings you're using both, and a lot of both, because you're downloading a lot of video and audio and you're sending a lot of video and audio. So it can pretty quickly eat up your bandwidth that's available to you if you don't watch it. So one thing that's helpful is to just think of all the things that are connected to your network at home or in your off-campus apartment or wherever you're working. Maybe you need to ask your roommate to disconnect the Xbox and disconnect their phone and their laptop for the hour that you're on your interview. Just disconnect it from the Wi-Fi so that it's easy. There's more bandwidth available for you. Even if, they're not using those devices, simply having them connected, they're sending and receiving a lot of information, back and forth all the time. Disconnecting is really the only way to free up that bandwidth space. You want to make sure you're doing that so you don't have choppy connections. As far as power goes, make sure you have enough battery life for your laptop. It's the worst thing when people don't, bring their charger. They think they're good to go, or they don't remember it, or they don't think about it, and then all of a sudden their laptop is like 5% and they're halfway through their interview and they don't know if they're going to make it. Notifications are also push notifications on a Mac or notifications on Windows. They can be very distracting when you're in an interview setting. Even if, the person on the other end can't see them or hear them, you still draw your eyes to them naturally whenever they pop up on your screen. Disable them. Don't let them have any type of free reign over being able to distract you in a train of thought in an interview setting. So just disable them. You also want to think a little bit about the space. When you're interviewing in person, you're going into a professional conference room, you're all dressed up, you're, got your Padfolio, and you're in a company, you're in a very professional environment. It's easy to feel like you're in that moment. You're in the moment, you're on your game, you're there. That's much more difficult to do when you're at home. When you're at home, you're naturally kind of lounging around. You're, a little bit off kilter maybe because it's a restful place. It's harder to get into a professional mindset from your living room. And so space and thinking about the space and how to create a professional space in your home for an interview is important. Trying to create some sort of space that feels a little more professional so you have the opportunity to get in that mode is helpful. Simply knowing your space is going to be helpful whenever you are doing these interviews. You want to check your vocal tone and volume. Every room that you're in is different. If you're in a big room, your microphone might sound hollow because it's picking up sound from far away, or the sound is traveling further. If you're in a small room and you're talking too loud, it may sound like they're yelling through the microphone. So you want to make sure you're testing out how your volume and tone sounds over the virtual meetings, so that you're not perceived as in a way that you might not intend. Lighting is also helpful, making sure the light is shining on you rather than coming from behind you. If you sit in front of a window, you're going to become a silhouette because the light is going to blind the camera and you will kind of be shaded out. So I would not sit in front of windows. I would not have the lights behind me. I would have them shining directly on me. You also want to make sure you have a good backdrop. Dirty dishes in the kitchen, laundry piled on the bed, all of those things are not helpful. Sorry to say it, but your Galaxy blankets in your off-campus apartment, or your Galaxy drapes that are hanging up on the wall, aren't going to be helpful or professional for an interview. Make sure your background is simple. It's not distracting. You want the intention in the interview to be focused on you, not something else. So don't just have a simple backdrop. And if you're using a fake backdrop, make sure it looks good. Some tools and some computers are not some cameras and software are not as good as others at taking out the video and cutting so it's just yourself and then the virtual backdrop. Sometimes it looks like you're a ghost in the video frame. So just make sure the backdrop that you're using is simple and that you are fully in the frame. In addition to the backdrop, though, you also want to know what you can see. The employer's not going to see what's in front of you, but you will. And if there are distracting things, it is easy to draw your attention away from the camera during an interview setting, and you don't want to do that. So watch what's in front of you. And then animals are nice. They're cute for normal meetings and classes, maybe. They run around. People love to see them. On a virtual interview, though, try to make sure that doesn't happen. Make sure they're not present. Just try to make sure that animals aren't just wandering around in the background. That just doesn't have a good look. Some general interview advice for virtual interviewing is eye contact. In person, it's easy to look around and to try to make eye contact because the people are there. Online, however, you have to look directly at the camera, and there's usually a little light beside your camera lens. Just stare at that because you want to talk directly to the people, not be looking around as you're answering your questions. Look directly at them and make that eye contact. You want to try to slow it down on a virtual interview so that, sometimes there is some routine static and cutoffs. And if you're going way too fast, it may be harder for them to pick up on what you're trying to say. If it is cutting in and out, or if there's some static or something like that. So slow down just a bit and pace yourself. You also should try to provide pauses at routine intervals during the interview. It's easy when you're online to not be able to read body language and thus interrupt other people. You can't tell when they're going to start talking. And so providing some pauses gives some opportunity for you to try to limit how much you interrupt other people on the call. Full professional dress is still expected. Don't just wear jeans with your dress shirt because they can't see them. It should be, just a given. Some people have ended up getting up in the middle of their interviews to grab something the employer was requesting, and immediately they realized they stood up and the employer saw that they were wearing jeans. Big deal, maybe not, but I would still try to just do full professional dress. You have to also understand that the body language that they can see is from here up and right here. Really, this is the only body language they have to go off of. So be mindful of what you're doing with your head, with your shoulders. What are your facial expressions telling to the employer? Do you seem interested? Just be mindful of how your visual presence is coming across in the virtual setting. And then always have a copy of your resume and cover letter available if needed, because they may call it out on the call. Okay. So this is just some general tips and advice for interviewing both in person and virtually. I think if you can take some time to figure out what are those key skills and examples that you're going to use for the various questions in an interview process. That would be helpful. I always recommend taking a sheet of paper, writing down 10 projects, examples, things you've done in the past, and trying to figure out all the different ways you could apply that experience if a question were to come up. Typically, just taking customer orders at McDonald's, that can be a helpful example for customer service. It can be a helpful example for communication. It can be a helpful example maybe for conflict management if you had to deal with customer complaints and issues from the front register. Uh, Having a bank of experiences that you've pre-thought through and identifying all the different ways you can flip those experiences or how they could be applied is going to be helpful for you in making sure you're quick at giving off those examples in an interview setting and impressing the employers. So, all right. Let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to reach out to Career Services if you want to set up a mock interview. Hopefully this video was helpful, and we look forward to hearing about all the successful interviews that you have in the future. Take care.